M15, Leadership in the Evolution of Mobility. Sydney, Australia. Mace Hartley, Executive Director, AfMA. Corporate Mobility. What do fleet managers really want from the supply chain? Mace Hartley tackles the question of corporate mobility from the customer side.
Right, so some of my objectives today we talk around that size matters, and that'll become meaningful in a second. What's important to fleet managers from AfMA's point of view, and mobility hurdles and transitions. And that's probably as big an issue for the suppliers who have their version of what mobility is, as distinct from fleet managers who think mobility is about moving goods and people and products around. So hold on for that ride. Outcomes, hoping you have an understanding of the fleet size and the opportunity and complexity. What's important to fleet managers, some clarity around that from our point of view, and how mobility can assist the various fleets in better outcomes for their organisation. So it'd be amiss of me not to take this opportunity to explain a little bit about AfMA. So AfMA, the Australasian Fleet Management Association. One of the subtleties there is a fleet management association, not a fleet managers association, because there are several people in an organisation that touch on the fleet. Whether you're talking your work health and safety committees, HR, your frontline managers that are responsible for the drivers, etc., etc. So AfMA has been around for 23 years. It's the peak industry body for fleet management, and it's a not-for-profit member-based organisation. 500 members through Australia, New Zealand and Asia, and our mix of memberships about 75% fleet owners, or people who manage their fleet, and 25% suppliers who are providing products and services into those fleets. And of the 75, that's about evenly split between government and private organisations, whether it be not-for-profits, NGOs, and a whole range of things. So AfMA exists to promote fleet management as a true profession, like a doctor, a lawyer, an accountant. I'm an accountant. I didn't think I'd ever end up in fleet management. It wasn't my passion when I finished my degree. And the other thing we do is advocate on behalf of fleet management. So last year, we go back to submissions we made around CO2 targets for vehicles, emissions, fuel quality. The most recent thing, and Bino Bonnet is supporting AAA's, the Australian Automobile Association's push to have real-world driving emission testings into the future, and from as little as $3 for every new car that comes into the country, we can achieve that. And given that they're testing on 30 different vehicles, 3 vehicles achieved the sticker numbers as far as fuel consumption, and the worst one was out by 59%. So, you select which 2 cars that can fit for purpose. You go through a whole of life cost calculator, and you find out that one of them's meeting its sticker and the other one's 40% away. Well, you've got no clue. So providing that clarity, I think, makes sense. Get off that bandwagon. And as AfMA members, you get access to a whole range of resources, weekly alerts, bi-monthly magazines. I guess the real more tangible things start to talk about fleet management guides, safety guides, greener motoring guides. There's about to launch a new whole of life cost calculator, and there's a range of other benefits for members. So that's a bit about who we are. The next part is about professional development for the industry, and that is about developing fleet managers and suppliers, the salespeople within the suppliers and vendors who need to understand the needs of their target audience. And we do that in a couple of ways. We have professional development forums, not unlike this format, where we have a couple of guest speakers, either a morning or an afternoon, at various, in each state, 3 or 4 events throughout the year. We have our Fleet Management Awards, been operating for 23 years, where we recognise excellence. So there's a Fleet Manager of the Year award, we have an Environmental award, and we have a Safety award. And we try and take those learnings and actually spread them out to other fleets. We have the Australasian Fleet Conference and Exhibition. For the last 5 years, it's been held in Melbourne. In May, it was quite successful. We had 430 attendees over the 2 days, and we delivered 26 educational sessions during those 2 days. And that event was only possible from a range of sponsors, not least of being the event sponsors being Toyota Fleet Management and Toyota Australia. And Then the last piece for us is the Diploma of Leadership and Management that was launched last year. And we're able to do that with the support of our corporate partners, Hyundai, and Mannheim and NTT Data Victory Systems. So their funding helped us contextualise a Diploma of Leadership and Management around fleet and automotive industry. And it's delivered over 5 lots of 2 days, face-to-face learning, and there's a project assignment, and the context of the assignments agreed between the employer, the facilitator, and the student. And we've seen some outcomes that are on budget to deliver $1 million savings in organisations. So very interesting. Enough about AfMA. Let's get on to the reason we're here, mobility. I talk about size and size matters. So recently, ACA Research conducted some research and identified that there are about 419,000 businesses in Australia that have a fleet of cars. Importantly, 19,000 of those businesses have more than 20 cars. Right? So you can see that 400,000 businesses have fleets of 1 to 19. So today, when we think about mobility, we're going to focus more on the 19,000 piece. And then when you look at the 19,000 piece, only 1,000 of those have more than 250 cars. So it's 1,000 businesses in Australia that have more than 250 cars. Why that's important? Because until you've got about 250 cars, you don't have a full-time fleet manager. So the mobility for all of those others is someone sitting in the chair, probably might be the secretary, might be doing purchasing, could be doing all sorts of things, and they're actually responsible for the cars because they just got given it. Their care about mobility is nowhere. They're actually trying to survive day-to-day warfare. So the focus on mobility really is at the top end of that spectrum, which is about 1,000 businesses. Now we'll talk about the actual number of vehicles in that segment. So of that corporate fleet, of those 19,000 businesses, they're estimating there's 2.162 million cars. And if we go to over 250 cars, we're talking about 1.3 million vehicles. And the medium's about 500. So size matters because with size becomes resource. I did a presentation in the States last year and compared America to here. America's 15 times the size of Australia. Why that's important and why size matters? Over there, your small fleet's got 1,500 cars. Equivalent fleet here's 100. You've got 1,500 cars, you've got 2 or 3 staff managing the complexities. Whereas here, you've just got half a person, 1 day a week. So still got to manage the same outcomes. So this slide's just talking about the fact that fleets are horizontal in a world of verticals. All these different industries have fleets of different makes and shapes and sizes and their complexities. And mobility means different things to each one of these companies or these industries. This slide is a bit of gold from my point of view. When someone talks about the complexity of fleet management, these 32 tiles sort of sum it up, from understanding government policy, internal policies, systems, tendering, whole-of-life cost calculation, non-standard equipment. It's the plethora of everything you need to touch as a fleet manager. And the nice side about that, if you've got 100 cars, technically you should have your head around those whole 32 items. And of course, really all you're doing is you've purchased them and you're hopefully servicing them, and at some stage you're trading them in to get a new car. And that's about all you're doing. But to do it all, you need to have your mind across those 32 items. And it is a complex world. So, now getting back onto some more important things. When we think about what's important to a fleet manager, this list are all the really important things to a fleet manager. But the things that aren't on this page are the things that take up 98% of a fleet manager's life, which is fuel cards not working, toll passes not working, infringement management, accidents, and that's where they spend their life, in putting out fires, speeding fines, work health and safety. It's a complex list, but this list here is the things that fleet managers really want to be working on, and they do, just not as often as they like. But this is where I think the opportunity potentially for mobility suppliers in the mobility space to actually help fleet managers out to solve some of these issues. And I think from a supplier point of view, you'd be looking to try and your product to help them in each of these pieces. And I think some of the supply chain and mobility will, what we talk about mobility will actually potentially can take away some of the firefighting and the transactional day-to-day warfare is possible as well. Fleet management's an ever-changing world, right? There are people outsource, they insource, they lose some staff, so now they throw it out, they leave it out, that hasn't been worked for them, so they thought they could outsource their obligations, they can't, the work health and safety's there's been a major accident, now they're bringing it back in because the board's concerned that they didn't have a clue what they were doing, not the FMO was doing anything wrong, but they thought internally they'd outsourced the world and they didn't, now they've got an issue, now they're trying to put their hands around it. So there's a whole range of things that sees the industry ebb and flow, and a lot of that staff movement. But, procurement, focus on savings. Fleet managers always focus on savings. I hear the story often. I've got no money. I can't be a member of AfMA. Can't be a member of AfMA, right? It's too expensive. $429, too expensive. So it's like, oh, it's okay. So it's like, where are you getting your personal growth? Because AfMA's really, beyond all else, is about the individual and their personal growth. Because we all know what we know, but we don't know what we don't know. And gatherings like this are about sharing knowledge and actually working out what that next step might be. It's trying to be ahead of the curve. Mind you, we never have time to get out of the office, so that's one of the other tragedies of working in fleet. You're caught up in that transactional life. So I think in this ever-changing world, mobility is looking to come and try and solve some of these problems for us. It remains to be seen how well they do that. So what's possible? I don't have these solutions. This is, I guess, where the vendors come into play and talk about what they can do to assist us. I'll pause for a second. I'm just going to talk about mobility, right? So mobility for me, at its core sense, is potentially, as I said earlier, moving people around. But it can be so much more. If I think from telematics, they say they're in the mobility game. Oh, really? So what is telematics doing? What is analytics doing for me that's going to help me with my mobility? Well, they're going to help you potentially reduce your FBT costs. They're going to help reduce some of the fraud in your fuel expenses, perhaps. They're going to let you know better routing. So there's a whole range of things that in-vehicle management systems or telematics will do for you, but we don't, as fleet managers, think of that as mobility. They do. They're selling us a mobility solution, right? So when you think about mobility, you've sort of got to defrag it, and every person you meet will have a different view of what mobility means to them. So what's possible here, one of the major concerns is work health and safety. It is a paramount concern. These are in no particular order. I think cost saving is probably the first order of merit for every fleet manager, and work health and safety would all say it's number one, but reality cost is number one, and work health and safety potentially number two. So these are in no particular order, but the suppliers potentially have the ability to come in and help solve some of these problems for us, potentially. And I think some of the challenges for the suppliers are it's very fragmented. No one has the total solution. There is one supplier out there that when you think of mobility, I think of it being able to get a ride share, being able to jump into a taxi or a bus or a plane or an electric scooter or a bike, whatever I need. I should just be able to ebb and flow from one mode of transport to another. It's the ultimate mobility. And there's an organisation out there and they exist overseas where there's an app and you buy credits, and those credits give you access to all public transport and all modes of transport in that city. So I think that could be ultimately where we're heading at one phase. But I don't have any of the answers on these, right? These are all about, I hear often from different suppliers how they perceive they can actually resolve these challenges. And I'm sure some of the speakers today will talk about some of that. More of what's possible, asset utilisation. How do we do more with less? For most of us that own our fleets, we'll think about pool cars, right? And that's probably the greatest way to potentially reduce some of your fleet most immediately. The ability of pool cars, and therefore, if that works more effectively, you move away from your taxis. I know one organisation in Means Group, they had initially had 450 pool cars across all of Tasmania, 8,000 staff had access, and they had a $1 million a year taxi bill. So over 3 years, that fleet went to 300, and the $1 million taxi bill went away. So that's asset utilisation, and that's potentially mobility in its very core sense. Okay. Mobility hurdles. I've talked already about the lack of understanding around what mobility really is and what does mobility mean for my business. So I think from a supplier point of view, trying to understand what that is quite important, trying to educate your clients on what problems you can solve with theirs. Because some of your clients will be too busy to even sit down and take the time to explore where they're spending most of their day. Difficult to establish a roadmap of now to mobility because we don't necessarily know what mobility means in the end game. We're going to break that down. Talk about supply chain being very diverse. Suppliers can do certain things. I think there are some certain suppliers out there that are looking to bundle and provide full solutions. We may never need to own a car again. We may be able to just in winter drive a hard top, and in summer we'll drive a soft top, perhaps. From a retail point of view, that could work for most executives out there. Never have to own it; they just chop and change. They're just renting a car from the time. In most cases, corporate fleet management is not very mature. We talked about there are only 1,000 companies out there that have more than 250 cars. So all the others probably have a very low level of maturity as far as managing their fleet, and they get their strength from their supply network. And if you go into government organisations, they rely back on their state, whether it be Vic Fleet, Q Fleet, etc. They go up that way to get their strength. But they're all quite insular, and they cut themselves off from suppliers because you can't have a coffee, you can't have lunch, and you can't talk generally. So some challenges. Finally, starting the journey, and starting the journey from mobility from two different sides. If you're a fleet manager in the room, it really is for you trying to understand what mobility means to you. What could you get from it? The challenge for you is there's probably 5 or 6 different suppliers that can service you for different things. Telematics is a mobility supplier, right? So I don't think any fleet manager necessarily thinks that telematics is a mobility supplier and service. So I think getting ready for the journey is about self-awareness in the organisation, and from a supplier point of view, it's actually educating your clients on what you can do for their mobility. You've got to break that down into the absolute fundamental building block of what you can do. So that's actually the end of my presentation, and I'm well ahead of time. I just thought I'd throw this slide up, which is something from ACA Research again that they're about to release, and it's showing, I guess, on-demand utilisation, right, from taxis, rental cars, ride share versus car share. And this next slide talks about an increase in those spaces. As you can see, the ride share is looking at net growth of about 40%, and car share 7%. So really interesting statistics. I think there are about just short of 700 organisations participated in that survey. If anyone in the room would like access to some of the statistics I put up initially regarding fleet size, etc., that's that work paper that ACA Research did. Talks about a whole range of services, being fleet management and others, about utilisation rates, etc. So if you drop me an email, I'm happy to share that with you. Generally, that was made available to all AfMA members. So if you need it, just let me know.